Hey, how's everyone out there? Hey, so this is chapter two, Bad Tomato. If you want to catch up, I read the first chapter a couple videos back. You're gonna have to look it up. This is chapter two, so I'm just gonna start where I left off. Okay? All right, let's go. That's what's up, I told him. Is your buddy's apartment far? And he said, nah, next block over. Cool, I told him. So we walked mostly in silence. So we come up to the apartments, and the girl we were walking with, she split off from us. So we walked to the back of the complex and came up on these three kids about my age at the time. It was a girl and two young men. They were sitting on these steps that led to the second floor. While this jerk Hammer tells me to stay and wait with them, I told him okay, so he proceeds to knock on the door. And I heard him say through the door, Roger, open up, it's me, Bailey. So the door opens and out steps this Roger asshole. What's up, Bailey? And Bailey says, I didn't need a dime. And this jerk Roger says, for who? And his buddy looked over at me and said, it's for him. And then this Roger asshole says, well, who the fuck is he? And I stood up and I said, I'm Brandon. He looked back at his buddy and told his buddy to come in. While they were in the apartment, the girl I was waiting with, she leaned in close and said, I heard you say your name is Brandon, but don't they call you T or Tomato? She smiled when she said Tomato. I asked her, where did you hear that? And she told me she was friends with a girl named Shelly that she went to school with, and she'd seen my picture on her wall and asked, who's that? And her friend said, that's my Tomato. Well, I leaned in close to her and I put my lips close to her ear. And I said, can we keep that between me and you? And when I pulled away, we locked eyes. And without hesitating, she said yes. I said, what's your name? She said, Lexi. And I said, you're cute, just like your name. And she started blushing. I asked her if she had a number, and she wrote it down on a scrap piece of paper. I took it, and I told her I would call her in a few days, and she asked no questions. And a moment later, this jack-off Roger stepped out. He walks over to me, and he hands me the bag of weed. It's small as shit, but I said nothing. And he told me, you want any more of that, you come back. But not after 5, you got it? Not after 5, or I'll break your back. And at that moment, my mind was made up. I was coming back nice and early. If I could catch both of them there, that would be great. If not, I'd have to knock them off one at a time. While walking away, the girl Lexi I met said, see ya, Brandon. We locked eyes again, and I said, see ya. I did not want to walk home or back to where Johnny was, so I jumped on the bus. And while sitting there, I thought to myself, up until that moment, I had never killed anyone before, but I had been around this sort of thing. I went with my pops to take care of a family friend who was touching my twin sister. Biggest mistake Wayne ever made. Wayne was my mom's best friend while my pops was away. Now, my mom was no good at picking a best friend, but she damn sure knew how to pick a good husband. Well, when my pops came to talk to me about it, and while talking to him, looking in his eyes, he knew my sister was not the only one Wayne liked to touch. So we talked all night, and then things went like this. So not long after our talk, Wayne needed some work done on his car, and my pops and him were going to go to AutoZone to get car parts. Well, the car was running, and Wayne was out in the passenger seat, and my pops was standing outside the car, and he yelled, Tomato, come here. So I went outside. You want to drive? My pops asked me, and I was like, really? Yeah, numbnuts, really. I acted all excited just like we talked about. So my pops got in the back seat behind Wayne, and I jumped up front in the driver's seat. Take it easy, my pops said. Then Wayne said, you letting that little runt drive, huh, Kev? Well, just don't kill me. And me and my pops, we just looked over at each other. Well, I drove off. The AutoZone was a couple miles away, and my pops and Wayne were drinking beer. And my pops lit a joint. And right before I was about to come up to the railroad tracks, my pops tapped me on the shoulder and told me to take a left at the tracks. There was a dirt road that ran next to the tracks, and my pops said it was a shortcut to the AutoZone and to slow down so him and Wayne could finish their beer. He said, now take it easy, Tomato. Don't get my car all dirty. Okay, I told my pops. So we drove along the tracks. We passed a few bums baking in the heat. And that piece of shit Wayne, he had not a care in the world. So we're driving along, and Wayne asked my pops, hey, you got any more of that, Kev? And my pops said, yeah, here, and handed Wayne the joint. So he took it, he lit it back up, and he took him a nice big hit, and he was holding the hit in while he passed the joint back to my pops. He was still holding the hit in, and before I knew it, my pops had a plastic bag over his head, and my pops had a pistol with the oil filter screwed on the end of it, and I heard two muffled pops. Then I heard, stop the car, Tommy. I did. Well, my pops got out of the car, never letting go of the bag, so he would not get blood in his car. He opened the passenger door and pulled Wayne out and laid him down. He took the bag off his head and put the plastic bag from Wayne's head in another clean plastic bag. My pops had a large bag of white powder, half it was cut, and he stuffed it down Wayne's pants. He got back in and we drove off. And right before I pulled out onto the main street from the tracks, my pops made the fist with his thumb and pinky out, and we banged the back of our hands together. Ding, ding, ding. My stop had come up, so I went to find Johnny, and I found him right where I left him. Check this out, Johnny. If you're in, you're in, and if you're out, you're out. That's okay, I told him. But while talking to Johnny, he looked scared and he said, "Ray's my friend too." I know that, Johnny. That's why it's got to be us and no one else. Johnny said he was in, and I told him okay, that I would call him when I figured everything out. He said okay, so I left, and I waited for the sun to go down, and I headed for the church by myself. And when I got there, I dug up the pistol and went home that night. While laying there, I could not stop thinking about Johnny and the way he looked when I talked to him. Fuck it, Johnny was out. I made up my mind. Why take the chance with Johnny? I was gonna do this shit solo. So I went to sleep and I got up the next morning. I got dressed and I put the 38 in my back pocket. It was about 11:30. I went and I jumped on the bus and off I went. I got off the bus near the complex. I walked in, I kept my head low and I did not make eye contact with anybody. I headed straight for the back of the complex. It was real quiet out. Nobody out. So I walked up to the door and I heard music playing. And I knocked, no answer. So I knocked again. Then this jerk-off Roger opened the door. "What's up, Brandon?" I told him I had 40. He stepped out, he looked around, he looked back at me and said, "You got 40? "Yeah, I got 40, I told him. He said to come in and he had me wait in the middle of the living room with this bullshit heavy metal music playing. And he went into the kitchen to bag the weed up. My heart started to pound. I was gonna do this shit. So I pulled the 38 out of my back pocket, I held it down at my side and I checked that the safety was off. I looked over at the stereo, I walked over to it and I turned that bitch all the way up. This punk come flying out of the kitchen yelling, "What the fuck you doing? You're gonna blow the speakers." And right after the word speakers left his mouth, I raised up and I squeezed. I hit him right on the cheek and both his hands went right to his face. And you should have seen the dumbass look on his face. He fell to his knees, exposing the top of his head, and I walked up and I squeezed the trigger again, hitting him on the crown of his head. And that was that. I walked over, I turned the radio down and I looked out the front window. All was good. I looked out the back patio window, nothing. But I noticed that the wall to his patio led to the canal, so that was the way I was leaving. I walked in the kitchen. There was about a pound of weed, a scale, and a couple $100. I put that in my pocket along with my money. I grabbed the weed and I dumped half of it out all over the counter. I closed the bag back up and stuffed it down my pants, and out the back I went. And while walking down the canal, I did not hear anything. No sirens, nothing. My heart was still pounding, but not with fear, with pride, that I had kept my word to Ray, someone who I loved and cared about. So ask me how I felt, and I'll tell you, I felt A1 all the way through. Now, as an older man, telling my story and what has transpired here, I firmly believe I did these things out of my loyalty and commitment to the people I love and care about. So the next day, I got to work cutting the pistol up. Man, nobody told me how hard it is to cut one up without the use of power tools. Well, I managed to cut it up in 5 pieces, and each piece I wadded up in a sheet of newspaper. And over the next few days, I threw each piece in a different trash can. And as soon as that trash man hit the block, I stood by to make sure it went in the truck. The party was over.